Ladies and gentlemen, if you're just making your way into the hall, please come by the Commander's Corner right now as we are getting set for our second presentation for today. You know, this topic is very popular. If you were here last year, it was SRO, standing room only, and no doubt it will be the same today. Introducing you from the 3rd Multi-Domain Task Force, Brigadier General Michael Rose, and from the 1st Multi-Domain Task Force, Colonel Charles Kean. General, take it over, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. Hear me? All right. Aloha. Okay. All right, we'll get it right. Is that okay? All right, hey, everybody. Thanks for coming. My name is Brigadier General Mike Rose. My name is Brigadier General Mike Rose. I command the 3rd Multi-Domain Task Force. I've been in command since June of 2023, soon after our task force's establishment in September of 2022.
Good afternoon, I'm Colonel Charles Kean. I command 1st Multi-Domain Task Force, been in command for just shy of 1 year. I'm taking command last June.
Okay, so today we're going to talk to you a good bit about what we're doing out here in the Indo-Pacific, but often we find that it's really important to frame for everyone what MDTFs are, why do they matter very much for this theater of operations specifically. So what I want to do is start with a description of the geography. Several of us that were in the keynote speakers today heard our senior leaders talk about this theater and the unique aspects of it. But I just kind of want to review a little bit of the important aspects of that. So U.S. Indo-Pacific Command covers half the surface of the globe, touches every other combatant command, has more than half of the world's population in it, but it has a whole lot of blue in between land masses. Those extended ranges are part of the reasons why we need to have the ability to project power from the land into the other domains. So a little bit more about this theater and its importance. So we've got a large number of the largest militaries in the world, the largest democracy in the world, 3 of the largest populations in the world, several nuclear powers, but then we also have a series of bilateral strategic alliances as well as critical partnerships with our nations around the region. So looking at the geography, our adversaries have invested heavily into an anti-access and area denial strategy to be able to contest our nation's military's ability to project power. However, because most of what they've oriented on is largely focused on the maritime and the air component ability to project power, the terrain that we're seeing here on this map identified where our allies are in orange, and then our partnerships and where we have key terrain from which we'll operate start to be the driver of what capabilities we need to be able to focus on bringing to the theater. So what are MDTFs? So the multi-domain task forces, born from this theater, the request ultimately from then Admiral Harry Harris for the Army to bring more lethal capability with precision at range for both kinetic and non-kinetic effects in support of the Joint Force theater level capability. So as we went on that journey, we built a task force that allows for us to maneuver and provide effects in all 5 domains of warfare. So that includes, of course, land, air, maritime, cyber, and space. And to be able to have impacts across the 3 dimensions, which are the physical dimension, the information dimension, and the human dimension. So as we built these capabilities out, we started to apply that into the theater. So what I want to give you is kind of a laydown of what an MDTF is. So the task forces are made up of 4 battalions. The task force headquarters is really intended to provide that synchronization of our targeting efforts, and then the synchronization of applying effects in support of and in synchronization with the Joint Force. So the multi-domain effects battalion, probably what I would argue is the least understood in terms of its value proposition in a lot of conversations. It includes our organic ability to provide intelligence support to targeting. It includes long-range communications capabilities, but then it also includes our cyber, our electronic warfare, and our space capabilities, organic to the task force. And as we talk through how we're going to employ these systems, it'll become more apparent of why those things matter. But having all that capability from the sensing and the non-kinetic effects standpoint, organic to the task force, is a critical component of what we bring to the Joint Force at the operational level. Probably more commonly understood and known is the kinetic fires. So the long-range precision fires exist inside of 1 battalion, the long-range fires battalion, and that includes the Army's hypersonic weapon system, the mid-range capability, which fires Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles and Standard Missile 6, and then the HIMARS platform, which is going to be the principal shooter for the precision strike missile, all of which Admiral Paparo mentioned as critical to what he's trying to build in terms of Joint Force capability out here. Moving further down the chart is also in the fires bin, not just protection, but our ability to provide air defense. So the indirect fire protection capability, organic, distributed operations to protect our formations, but also to be able to sense and fuse that offensive and defensive fires data at the edge in support of targeting done by us and by the Joint Force. And then, of course, a sustainment component, which, as you look at the archipelagic environment that is heavily influenced by maritime and our unique sustainment requirements, having an organic sustainment capability that can plug into the theater architecture is critical for us to operate. So then, why do MDTFs matter? And why MDTFs matter really gets back to the heart of what I was talking early on with the geography and the threat that has been posed by not just China, but other threat actors in this region that are contesting our ability to have freedom of navigation and freedom of maneuver at the operational level. So MDTFs provide decisive land power on key terrain that is distributed, survivable, persistent, and lethal. And so our ability to move through that key terrain in proximity to the adversary inside weapons engagement zones, of which are oriented against mostly other elements of the Joint Force, provides us comparative advantage in this region. The MDTFs, by doing so, complicate adversary decision making. So our ability to contribute to deterrence by putting systems in place that make them have to go back to the drawing board in terms of their planning and their assumptions that they've made through that process is critical to contributing to deterrence. we provide the Joint Force a sensing capability. So that multi-domain effects battalion that we have organic brings a whole lot of sensing capability. Admiral Paparo mentioned that our ability to sense in the terrestrial layer, the air layer, the stratospheric layer, and the space layer contribute to the Joint Force's understanding, and then to be able to share that information and synchronize and synthesize the effects side of the house. Talked a whole lot about what we have from the kinetic side, but then our ability to provide electronic warfare, cyber effects, and to operate in the space domain all really contribute to how we as an organization provide that land power in support of the Joint Force.
So I've been asked many times, I've been in command for about a year now, and I've been asked many times, hey, is it a concept or is it a capability? And hey, can you provide combat credible capabilities forward now? I can say yes. And going back to the idea of a concept or a capability, I'll say it's both. Because we're continuously learning. And I'll take you through the org chart and tell you in terms of capabilities, true capabilities that are out there today, forward deployed, or training to get forward deployed, experimenting, rehearsing how we integrate from the space, I say from the heavens to the earth, from the air to the sea, and all the digits that flow in between, how we integrate those capabilities to create a period of relative overmatch that the Joint Force or our partner force can exploit. We could do that either in a supporting role, where our effects are layered against joint asset effects, or in a supported role, where we are given a discrete temporal problem set for the Joint Force, where we integrate other joint capabilities to answer or to solve Joint Force problems. But let's just go down real quick. So the space company, a lot of people ask, like, what's our game in the space? What is the Army's game in the space? And Admiral Paparo hit it earlier today, and like why space matters to the Department of Defense, why it matters to commercial. And for us, we really look at it as three problem sets. Really, the ability to use space or space capabilities for intelligence, reconnaissance, surveillance, and target acquisition. That's out there. It's vehicles there, and as it relates to the land and the other domains. It's how space is used for communications, both friendly communications, commercial communications, or adversarial communications. And then how space relates to position, navigation, and timing. And everyone really hones in on the position piece of that and the navigation piece of that, but I tell you the timing piece of that in this digital world is extremely important. So capabilities to see, sense, understand, not just what is floating out there in the atmosphere, but how it relates to that which is employed either in a friendly manner or an adversarial manner within the other domains. When you look at extended range sensing and effects, experimenting with capabilities at ranges that matter. We saw the map of the terrain out there, a lot of blue, right? But as Admiral Paparo stated earlier, a lot of that blue has to transit key maritime choke points or key maritime terrain. So our ability not only to affect at range or to see, sense, understand elements at a distance in which we could affect, but to layer that with the Joint Force and with the adversary's ability to put other assets of the Joint Force at risk. So operating forward at ranges that are relevant in order to see from the stratospheric layer to the air layer, down to the terrestrial layer and the sea layer, how do you see that? How do you make sense of it? How do you put it together so you understand what is happening out there and you could understand what effects you might achieve to achieve that relative overmatch? So that's both, we're experimenting today, we're experimenting with extended range UAS, we're experimenting with high altitude balloons and high altitude platforms, various capabilities to execute that. Not only in the see, sense, make sense, understand, but also to communicate and the data passage back to those that could affect or those that could fuse that information. The information dominance. We have active teams right now protecting our own networks. The networks that we create, we have active teams working with partners, protecting their networks, helping them understand vulnerabilities to their networks. If you look at the signal company, so I describe it, just came out of the Philippines for exercise Salakanib and Balakatan. And I described the area in which we were operating at the tactical level, how it relates to the operational and strategic level. So think of the distance between Washington, D.C. and Miami. Think of 11 to 20 different units of action, task organized into teams with specific capabilities that have to communicate not only with our partners, with the Joint Force, but then that which is coming in from other locations across the tyranny of distance, coming into that region, have to communicate with them where it matters. That's what our signal company is doing today. Then you look at the military intelligence company. We fielded the Titan Advanced prototype system. We're testing the system, working through it, and that's the ability to fuse layers all the way from space down to the terrestrial, and to be able to fuse it to make it actionable. And not only to understand it, to make it actionable. And then the ability to support that. And then you talk about the long-range capabilities. HIMARS, mid-range, hypersonics, they're things, right? But they're not the end state, right? So with the HIMARS battery, we're operating with current munitions as they sit. We're experimenting with future munitions that are coming on board. The ability to do that in small distributed teams, to place it, to hide in plain sight and place it where it matters, we just demonstrated that back in, at the end of April, where you had multiple elements, multiple HIMAR elements moving by air from separate locations, consolidating on an island feature, moving from the air point of debarkation onto a ship, transiting 120 miles, getting off that ship, driving through the desert another 100 kilometers, getting to a hidden firing position, and then supporting a counter live fire or counter landing live fire in support of our Philippine partners, the Marines, the Air Force, and the Joint Force out there. So that's happening today. So we're exercising, we're demonstrating that today. Mid-range capability. You can see in the open news where the mid-range capability is having effects right now in a deterrence and an assurance manner. Long-range hypersonics. You can see it in the open news, the successful end-to-end test that occurred back in December. We've had the kit in our formations for quite a while, working tactics, techniques, and procedures on how to employ that. Working with the Joint Force in joint exercises, whether it's Bamboo Eagle, Resolute Hunter, what's happening forward in theater, and how to employ this very exquisite capability where it matters to enable the Joint Force and enable our partners. Then you look at the IFPC. So a lot of people think of the IFPC as a capability, and we're fielding it. We're fielding it this year. We've experimented with it, we're testing it. So I think of it as a capability for like a localized level protection up to a certain group of air breathing capability out there. What's key to this system, it's its integration with the larger force. Its integration and its ability to integrate and to decentralize so you can have a layered defense from Group 1 UAS all the way up to the highest flying things. And not only a layered defense, but this system could help better understand that which might be flying at further distances over our heads. Then you look at the counter UAS. It's not just lethal, it's non-lethal as well. And how do you integrate this in a foreign country where they own the spectrum, and how do you integrate these capabilities with our partners so they're mutually supporting not only to what we're trying to do, but protecting our partners as well. And then we talked about the distributed support capabilities, tying in with the Joint Force. We can't do it ourselves, and we have to do it differently. How do you sustain very exquisite capabilities at the same time you have to sustain common capabilities or common commodities that we use? So we're testing not only the ability to expand in contracting, but the ability for distributed sustainment in contested environments from the tactical level to distances of hundreds of miles away. So across the board, I can tell you it's happening right now. Between third MDTF and first MDTF, we're very busy. We are a commodity that the Joint Force wants to figure out how to tie in. We're there operating forward with our partners. One of the unique capabilities that I didn't describe. So we have a rotational presence. We have a persistent presence forward in the first island chain with our partners. And specific to first MDTF, some of the subject matter expertise that we have internal to our formation has created a lot of value with our partner force. And I'll explain in detail. We call it originated about 23 months ago. Heck, it was 2 years ago. It originated as part of Bala Katan. And this is where together we use open source information. We use information that's readily available, our capability to network that information, sitting side by side with our partners to understand what that information is telling us as it relates to what the adversary is doing, what we are doing, and the environment that surrounds us. And it was originally focused on maritime domain awareness, helping our Philippine partners better understand what's happening in the West Philippine Sea. or other bodies of water around them, but it has expanded into air domain awareness, into the terrestrial awareness, and then how do you integrate that? And we've been asked to expand that not only from one unified command within the Philippine Defense Force, but across multiple locations, and they're there today, learning together with our partners. I'll pass it on.
Hey, so first, MDTF's been around a little bit longer than we, and they are at what we refer to as our full build authorization. That's that entirety of that line and block chart. So third MDTF is the newest MDTF that the Army has fielded of the 5 that are planned to be fielded. So we are in our build phase. However, worth highlighting is that after standing up in September 2022, we began campaigning as part of USERPAC's Pathways series in the theater in May of 2023. That's a very short amount of time to go from initial soldiers showing up in the formation to beginning to contribute to the campaigning. Why that's important is because we are learning by doing. We have a partnership with first MDTF and of course second MDTF in the European theater, but the concept of not waiting until you get to a full build capacity, all your capability is fielded, the manuals are written, and we have the whole .mil PF paradigm kind of laid out, and then start to operate. We flipped that on its head. We collectively have flipped that on its head, and I think what it's showing the value to the Joint Force and to the Army is that you put smart folks empowered to solve hard problems in place and have the relationships with the S&T community to use campaigning activities to experiment with emerging technologies in the theater, you're going to move a whole lot faster. So that's exactly what we've been doing and what we're kind of trying to showcase here. So what we took a variation of what Colonel Kean referred to for the information sharing node, and we've been able to build on that across all 5 domains using publicly available and commercially available information to campaign across, mostly oriented around Southeast Asian nations, through the Pathways campaign series to show value of partnering with an organization like ours. Partner nations and allies in this theater don't need to have a like capability in order for us to be interoperable with them, is really what we're getting after. Helping them understand all the domains related to their national security interests has been a way that we've been able to provide value to our partners. And then through that, particularly in Southeast Asia, we start to build familiarity, relationships. We're able to test some of our concepts in that theater. And then we pivot elsewhere in the theater where, particularly in Japan, Korea, Guam, Palau, other nations where we may have to apply different capabilities, we're able to also take that familiarity, relationships, validation of concepts, and then experiment with some of the systems that you see here on the screen. More fielded capability that we have yet to put into soldiers' hands. Doesn't exist on an MTO. It's things that we're helping inform the requirements process through campaigning activity as part of our contribution to growth of the MDTF capability and the capacity in this theater. And by doing so, we're setting conditions for fourth MDTF, which in the next couple of years will also be assigned to U.S. Army Pacific. So you'll have 3 MDTFs worth of capability to cover that vast expanse of distributed land-based capability to provide that land power, both not just in the first island chain, but also in the archipelago that runs through Southeast Asia, where the strategic choke points are critical for both our interests, our allies' interests, and our partners' interests. So that very specific campaigning activity has really been kind of infused into our DNA from the outset. Up until this summer, I had not had a fires battalion. However, we executed the Army's first precision strike missile shot during Valiant Shield that Admiral Paparo referred to earlier. We've done multiple live fires in the theater with partners and with Joint Force partners, and then C2ing those ourselves. As we build, we are learning, and we're really getting set to build, move into a very rapid set of building here coming up. So we use campaigning very, very specifically to learn, to build those relationships, to validate concepts, and then to rehearse what it is that we may be called upon to do in crisis or conflict.
Yeah, just to add on what General Rose was talking about there, and you talk about like why it matters, like speed matters. all right? And we say, hey, is it a concept or a capability? Like, it's in growth. Like, we will never be a finished product because technology is changing so fast. Our adversary is integrating their capabilities in different ways. So our ability to be forward, to gain and maintain contact in all domains with those which want to do harm or want to contest sovereignty is important, because everything that we're doing, every piece of energy that we put into the atmosphere, every movement that we have, our adversary's watching. And we're watching them. We're seeing action, reaction, counteraction, and learning at a pace that matters. We can't learn fast enough, but I can tell you that the MDTFs are absolutely in the game, and we know we're not a finished product. And this comes learning with our joint force as well. Just recently, as Balakatan was the first full battle test of the Philippines Territorial Defense Plan. And it was integrated with the Marines, integrated with the Army, integrated with the Air Force there in the Philippines over the last several weeks. And learning through CPXs, command post exercises, learning through simulations, learning through live and virtual at a pace that is relevant, at a pace that matters, and learning not only from what's happening in theater, but learning from what's happening across the world. General Rose talked about with the second MDTF and how we share our lessons. Learning from everything that's happening in Europe and how the battle is adjusting, how quickly it's moving, and the changes that we need to be aware of that are relevant to our theater as well. So there's a lot of joint integration and joint learning. There's a lot of partnered learning as we go back and forth and we continue to experiment and operationalize forward.
So I want to talk just a little bit about partners and allies and what our role is in assurance and deterrence. So we've kind of threaded that through a lot of the conversation we've had today. But I think it's well acknowledged that the United States' strategic and operational comparative advantage is our relationships with allies and partners. So we're a part of that through Operation Pathways. We talked about that a little bit earlier, the series of linked together, multinational joint force and Army exercises in the theater, on the terrain on which we will have to operate to give us that real-time feedback. But in so doing those experiments in the theater, demonstrating resolve and working with partners to not only achieve our national security objectives, but also to help them be more prepared to secure their sovereign territory and their national interests. That is an assurance opportunity that we fully well take advantage of at every opportunity. We would much rather go forward in the region and train on the capabilities that we're talking about here on the key terrain with the partners and allies that we're going to work shoulder to shoulder with, than at any point go back to a CONUS-based training center. So we've demonstrated the value of that through the Joint Pacific Multinational Readiness Center and its ability to train in the theater, both in the cold weather environment, in the tropics, and then to be able to project that power forward through its expeditionary capability to run a combat training center with partners and allies. We take advantage of those opportunities as well as an assurance capability. And in so doing, very observable activities that our adversaries are seeing, and it contributes to deterrence in a pretty significant way. Colonel Kean mentioned the impacts of having the mid-range capability, the Typhon weapon system in the Philippines. That's just one very, very common example, but there's a whole lot more when we fly high altitude balloons, in the first island chain and in the second island chain, when we do the first precision strike missile live fire in the theater, when we bring these systems that were at once experimental but are now fielded with real relevant capability into the theater, it's contributing significantly to the deterrence that the joint force is really kind of get after, and what Admiral Paparo talks about as our most important duty.
So to add on what General Rose just described there, so we talk about some of the capabilities that we have across the formation, from prototype to systems of record. And then what is the value proposition of the rest of the Army? And I kind of describe it like this. So the majority of the Army, if you look at just the numbers within the Army, a lot of it is tactical formation, say from corps down to division, down to brigade, down to battalion and down. For the most part, the tactical formations are consumers of joint asset. You can imagine a forward observer calling in an airstrike, a consumer of joint capability, where the MDTFs were purpose-built to be an enabler of joint, which is a paradigm shift for the Army as well. So the ranges that we operate in, the capabilities that we bring to bear, do not reside elsewhere in the joint force. The ability to put it on land and to create different vectors or problems that our adversary has not accounted for is important, and the joint force sees that value. And then to continue to modernize at pace, like another value proposition for the Army is that which we are experimenting with can be scaled if it has tactical value. So we talked about the Joint Pacific Multinational Readiness Center and JPMRC-X, which is an exportable version of that. In the next couple months, we'll be executing in the Philippines. So the same capabilities that we're experimenting with extended range sensing could have very valuable, or could be very valuable to a tactical force if that same thing that could go, say, 1,000 kilometers out, but could stay in the air 48 to 72 hours, if it's flying overhead in a circular pattern, extending a network, allowing tactical units to communicate in a jungle environment, probably pretty applicable to the tactical formation. And using what we're learning and pitching it back to the Army so they can make decisions on how to scale that, where it's relevant, where it makes sense. The same with extended range sensing, the same with a lot of the networking and how we pass data. Those same lessons learned are directly translatable to how 25th Infantry Division is talking with their Philippine partners as they're walking through the jungle together. So there's a lot in modernization, there's a lot in scaling, and what we bring to the Joint Force and what we bring to the Army.
So to close this, and then hopefully have a couple minutes for questions before we get booted off the stage. Yeah, look, we are leaning forward hard on integrating emerging technologies. We've conditioned our force to be able to rapidly integrate those emerging technologies, show the value to the Joint Force, and then inform future requirements process, for the Army as it learns to do multi-domain operations at every single echelon as part of our operating concept. We are building deep, deep partnerships with our allies and our partners in the region. Japan, the Philippines, Australia, to name a few, but there are several others. And those deep, deep partnerships are paying dividends every single day as we build collective capability. And then finally, we're integrating that with the Joint Force to all together demonstrate resolve, assure all those allies, and contribute to deterrence so that we don't end up having to use these in a conflict in this theater. With that, I think we have time for a couple questions.
Questions? General?
Hey, thanks for the great brief. As you evolve the MDTF, if you had to design the fourth one, would it look exactly like yours, and what would the next generation be like?
So yes and no. I mean, there's key elements in terms of structure that make sense, right? Very similar problem sets, just the tyranny of distance, where we're operating, an archipelagic environment, et cetera, that makes sense for all three MDTFs. But that doesn't mean that the capabilities have to be the same or should be the same. One of the things that General Rose and I, that we're building, is he's testing different capabilities than I'm testing or experimenting with. So they may have different applications. So underneath the user pack model, some of his capabilities that he's testing, training, and developing could be task organized into a problem set that I'm dealing with. So there's a lot of value in uniqueness, but there's a lot of value also in similarity. So structure-wise, yes. Capabilities, not exactly.
If I could just add to that very quickly, and then I think we'll have time for another one, is, I embrace the fact that we're a task force. And task force, often folks look at, well, that means it's temporal against a specific problem. We have task forces that have been around decades. So I'm not really worried about the timing aspect of it. What I really embrace about that is that they can all be uniquely designed to that specific geography or that specific problem that we're trying to solve. So it may be okay that we are fielding different systems. And the Army has really embraced this idea that we need to be more agile in the way that we apply our acquisitions process to be able to get the right capability that's specific, or in some cases bespoke, to that unique formations mission. There's not that many MDTFs in the Army, so we're really kind of pushing on niche capability that that may or may not necessarily field across the entirety of the force.
Good morning, gentlemen. Young Ju, Army Fellow, AUSA. Question to you all in regards to S&T and technology development. So you all talked about your collaboration with joint environment, joint forces, and then also partners. But when it comes to S&T, I guess first question is, how are these lessons learned that you guys are testing out, getting back to the both S&T and academia? And then two, what outside of the joint or DoD environment, how are you collaborating with those entities to come up with some unique solutions that are not native to the DoD environment?
Yeah, I got a couple thoughts on that, and I'll pass it to Charles because he's doing some other stuff. So we've established, open conversations with those S&T, across the entirety of the S&T community, whether that's in government or outside of government. That includes industry partners that are satisfying or closing some of our gaps. So that open conversation helps us inform them of where we have our challenges. And then there's also ongoing research and development where they're bringing to us capability that they've been invested in at a certain technology readiness level that they need the feedback to move forward. So because we've got that open dialogue, we've got a pretty quick ability to use pathways to be able to put experimental technology into the theater. They bring resources, they bring experimentation objectives, and we give them back through an operational touch point the valuable feedback that makes that technology better before decisions are made to field it at scale. That's a pretty big investment out here, and because of the fact that this environment is harsh on particular pieces of hardware, and the operating environment is unique, very different than Europe and very different from the Middle East, where we've gotten decades of feedback on a lot of our capabilities. We're able to do that through our campaigning activities. And the second piece is how are we informing the Joint Force and how are we informing the Army? Charles will probably talk a little bit more about this, but the Chief of Staff of the Army's focus area of professionalizing the force gives us opportunity to write, to contribute to the body of knowledge based on what we're experimenting with and learning. And I'd got to give kudos to the first MDTF because they've done quite a lot of that, of putting that information out there. We also do it in closed settings, right? Information papers that aren't released to the public to inform that process. But contributing to that academic body of knowledge has been key.
Yeah, and I just have one thing to add, and I'll bring it down to like a really tactical level. And this is like the old adage is if you tell everybody, you tell nobody, right? So a lot of what we're teaching our formations and what we're teaching across our capabilities is that you have to be very specific. That in what we're doing, it's not just exercising to exercise or experimenting to experiment, that you have to have clear objectives, then you have to have models to gain that, to either validate hypothesis or not, and then in as clear form, provide that feedback to those who can make a difference. And it goes across academia, it goes across the development, whether it's DevCom, whether it's other capabilities that are out there that we are tied into that are giving us stuff to test for them. Sometimes they send representatives, they being industry, they being academia, they being development agencies, send them out with us, forward in theater to work out their exercise objectives, collect data, or they give us key information requirements that we are feeding specifically back to them. Because the specifics matter. It's too easy to do the hand wave to say this is going to happen, but the mechanics matter. How digits pass, how things operate, how they weather. I could say a certain system we had in the Philippines, how it weathers 5 different typhoons that go across, and how the system operates in that type of environment.
Okay. Hey, everybody, really, really appreciate you guys indulging us and letting us go a little bit long. We're competing with lunch, so really appreciate everybody giving us their time. This is something we're clearly passionate about, being the commanders of these formations. But it is an incredibly important part of what the Army is bringing to the Joint Force in this theater. Now, Admiral Paparo spent a good amount of time talking about how much he values the fires, both kinetically and non-kinetically, and for us, how do we enable that through our ability to sense, in the theater. Partnerships, operating from key terrain, assuring our allies, deterring our adversaries, and bringing some capability that creates dilemmas for our adversaries, that disrupts potential timelines and their thinking of whether they would initiate some action that is counter to our security objectives. So thanks everybody for the time today, and we'll hang out here for a little bit probably and make ourselves available. Thanks.